I'm Josh Swartz.
And I'm William Illingworth.
Hosts of the High Tech Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now.
Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others.
Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Dr. Rebbca, Dudovitz, MD, and Dr. Dennis Johnston, PhD, about a recent research report. The AVID program leads to lower substance abuse, better health behaviors among high school students, UCLA research suggests. So much to learn. Thanks for listening. And by the way, it'd be so cool if you went to my website, stephenmiletto.com/reviews, and left a review for the podcast. Could you do that? That'd be so cool. You know, another way you can do it is you're listening on your podcast listening platform. All you got to do is click on that podcast art and go down to the bottom of it. And you should see a place to leave 5 stars. Hint, hint. That would be nice. And to leave your comments. That would be so cool. Could you do that for me? Thanks so much. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. And enjoy the show. Hey, do you like awesome rings? Do you need a ring to replace one that you lost ages ago? Or do you need a new wedding band because yours is no longer fixable? Well, I have this cool sponsor, Boone Titanium Rings. They can be found at boonrings.com. They make their rings from titanium, and you can get the rings carved, engraved, inlaid, laser cut. There's even special collections like the Hunter series or the Gamer rings or the Black Zirconium. Very cool. They have models that have meteorite, wood, or other inlays. Check out boonrings.com, and at checkout, use the code for my podcast. It's capital T, capital L, capital K, and the number 12, TLLK12, and you will get 10% off the total, and you will help this podcast out. Thanks so much. I love my ring, and I know you will love yours.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests, and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Rebbca Dudovitz, MD, MSHS, and she is an associate professor in General Pediatrics at the David Geffen School of Medicine. Dr. Dudovitz graduated from the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA in 2005 and completed her residency training in the UCLA Pediatric Community Health and Advocacy Training program in 2008. That's also known as CHAT. After residency, she served as a chief resident before entering a health services research fellowship through the UCLA Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholars Program. Through the Clinical Scholars Program, she gained expertise in community-based participatory research and received a master's degree in health services from the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. Following her fellowship training, she joined the faculty in the Division of General Pediatrics. In addition to seeing patients, she supervises resident physicians and medical students and directs health services research for the Department of Pediatrics. Her research focuses on school health and how academic achievement and school environments influence health behaviors. Also with us today is Dr. Dennis Johnston, who is responsible for overseeing AVID Center's research agenda and coordinating evaluation efforts of the various components of the AVID College and Career Readiness System. Prior to joining AVID, Dr. Johnston served as Director of Assessment, Accountability, and Research at the San Diego County Office of Education. He was the Director of Assessment and Evaluation of the Grossmont Union High School District, the Senior Research Associate of the Comprehensive Adult Student Assessment System, and was part-time faculty at the College of Education at Temple University and the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for joining us today. Glad to have you on the show, and say hi to everybody.
Good morning. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Well, glad that you're here. And before we get into the study and all that, what I'd like to do first is I'm going to have each kind of explain what you do, all right, what your world is here. So Rebbca, as an associate professor in general pediatrics at UCLA, and talk about that. What do you do? What's the big focus of what you're all about?
Yeah, I get to spend my days thinking about how to keep children healthy and make a world that makes health the easy choice for them. So in my clinical time, I am a general pediatrician, so I see children for checkups and for sick visits, and I get to work with residents and medical students who are training to be doctors and pediatricians. And that all really kind of shapes how I think about the forces that help support health or work against health. And so in my research world, I get to think about how to shape systems that make health the easy choice for kids. So not everybody knows what health services research is, but essentially we study the systems that influence health for kids. A big part of that is the healthcare system, but many other systems influence children's health as well. And so I spend a lot of my time thinking about how the education system influences health for kids.
That is excellent. Thank you. And thanks for explaining that too, because yes, I was hoping you would. So good stuff. So Dennis?
Sure, love to. I get the privilege of heading up our research area at the AVID Center. As you mentioned, I've been with AVID now nearly 20 years. And we basically look at the efficacy, the effectiveness, the model of AVID's implementation of our framework, which I'll talk about in a little while. But really, it's ensuring that educators are getting what they need to ensure that all students have the opportunity to grow into the best version of themselves, so that they have the opportunity to pursue their aspirations and live lives that they're very proud of and can contribute to society.
Very cool. So, and just as a note, before we got online, we were talking about how it's really possible that Dennis and I ran into each other back in the mid 2000s. So, because I was a high school principal and we were using AVID program to work with our students. So, without me saying any more about that, let's make sure that what we do. Let's start by sharing what is AVID.
Sure. So AVID, really, when it comes down to it, AVID is a philosophy. It's a way of thinking about schooling. And we articulate that sort of philosophy through our framework. It's AVID is a system, a framework that provides scaffolded supports for educators primarily, and who then turn to students and encourage college and career readiness across all campuses. And so basically, we train roughly 50,000 educators a year, teachers, administrators, superintendents, and we touch approximately, actually more than 8,000 schools currently, and more than 2 million kids every year. Our philosophy is, as I mentioned, articulated in our framework, and our framework is all about system inputs. AVID is all about system inputs. It's what we as educators have control over, to ensure that students have the opportunity to learn what is needed, the skills, the opportunity, knowledge, and obtain the agency to pursue and aspire and gain and be successful in what their dreams are all about. Our framework articulates 3 components of what we believe students need. Students need to have rigorous academic preparation. Students need to leave high school with the opportunity knowledge, that is, understanding a world that lies further than 1 block in front of them, 1 block to the left, 1 block to the right, and 1 block behind them. Many of our kids, that's what they see as their world. We need to open up that landscape so that they see and believe that, hey, I can become a doctor, I can be a lawyer, I can be an astronaut, I can be a baker, the best baker ever, I can be a chef, I can be whatever I want to be. And then lastly, we need to develop the student agency in kids. We need to believe that they can have a life that they believe in, that they believe they have the skills to be successful in, and that they can take action and they can initiate action to pursue those dreams. That's what we believe students need. Now, in order for us to embed all that, educators have specific tasks and jobs to do as well. We believe that all educators must insist on rigor. We believe that all educators must break down barriers to access rigorous opportunities and the experiences we know kids need to have in order to be successful. We need to align the work in schools so that students don't spend as much time as they are learning how to do school, and they spend more time learning while at school. And then all educators need to advocate for kids. We need to understand that we're there to support our students. Take those 7 elements and you put them atop the 4, what we call domains of all schools: instruction, systems, leadership, and culture. And when you thoughtfully address these issues within those 4 domains, we can make amazing things happen on campuses. In a little while, we'll talk a little bit about those impacts.
That's so cool. And just a note, this is cool. You bring back a lot of memories here because one of the things that we used AVID for was to help. I was tasked with. I went to schools to make change, and very high needs population, very transient population, and had a fairly violent culture associated within the school. And we had to get focused on get that under control, and then focused on the academics. And part of it was to try and make and you had to think about the times also. But part of it was to get kids the study capabilities and skills and such to be able to get into AP classes and then become successful in AP classes, so a 3 or better on a test, and so that they then could get access to whatever academics beyond high school they wanted, and it was awesome because we went from 44 kids in 1 year to growing it to eventually over 800 kids taking AP tests and being successful in these classes and going on to those 4-year institutions that they wanted to. So I got to tell you, kudos. All right. By the way, I was not paid to say that by anybody. This is not
I hear stories like that, Steve, from educators all the time. And while I'm very proud of the work that we do at the center, and we do work very, very diligently to make sure that we provide the most up-to-date research and resources to support educators, it really is the teachers in the classrooms, the administrators on the campuses. They deserve, the yeoman's amount of credit for this. They're the ones that are transforming schools that transform kids. And that's a really important perspective that AVID takes. AVID takes a perspective that it is taking responsibility and accountability for that which we educators have control over. We don't have a lot of control over the socioeconomic status of our kids. We don't have any control over their ethnicity, right? Or their gender or anything like that. All of those things are out of our control. We don't need to be paying extensive amounts of time with those issues. We need to be sensitive of those issues, but we don't need to be spending a lot of time on those issues. What we need to spend a lot of time as educators on is establishing relational capacity with each other and with our kids. When we do that, we build trust. And when we build trust, we become vulnerable. And when we become vulnerable, we take risks. It is at that point that we take risks and that we fail safely, that we have the opportunity to grow. And that is true not just in education, that is true throughout our lives. It is when we take risks and we don't get the outcome that we hope to get, that we try something different. And trying something different is growth. And that is what AVID is all about. That is what we mean by ensuring rigor in the classrooms. That is what we mean by ensuring opportunity knowledge. That is what we mean by having student agency. You don't take risks if you don't have agency.
Oh, you got that right. Good stuff. So awesome. So Rebbca, let's shift over to you. And our focus today is a study that was released in December of 2022 from the peer-reviewed journal Pediatrics. So tell everybody what that means and a little bit about the journal but let's talk about what peer review means because it gives it some chutzpah.
Yeah. So in academics, when you go off to publish a paper somewhere, you submit your work to a journal and they send that out to 3 other scientists to look at, to sort of judge the rigor of the work and give you feedback to strengthen the manuscript. And if everybody agrees that the manuscript is worthwhile to publish, then they give you like that gold stamp, that seal of approval, and that's how your work gets published. So it is really being in dialogue with the scientific community with the goal of strengthening the science that comes out of that. Pediatrics is, I was really happy to see the work published in that journal because it's the journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and so really speaks to pediatricians and child health advocates. And that's the audience that I think needs to hear about this work. So that was really gratifying.
Yeah, that's cool because this is that means 2 different groups understanding that this has impact in many different ways. So
absolutely.
So cool stuff. So the report, the AVID program leads to lower substance abuse, better health behaviors among high school students, UCLA research suggests. So cool. Let's talk about this just a little bit. I mean, the article refers to you, Rebbca, as the lead author. Could you talk about your role in the research?
Yeah. Well, so I first heard about AVID when I was interviewing recent high school graduates about how the experiences that they had in school shaped their health and life trajectories, especially around substance use. And one of the things that really stood out to me, I was interviewing a wide variety of kids who had experienced very different school environments, different kinds of schools, charter schools, public schools, like all across the board. And one of the things that stood out to me was that when I encountered students who had been in AVID, they talked about experiencing an AVID family. And they talked about how that really opened up a different group of kids for them to make friends with, and teachers and adults on campus who saw them in a different way and advocated for them in a different way and made them feel valued and cared for and part of a school community. And they talked about how that really influenced their choices. When they were hanging out with their friends and talking about college, it was a different group and doing different activities than the other kids who might have been, unsupervised and maybe getting into some trouble. So, they talked about how influential this was to them, and that got me really interested in the program. So I started learning a little bit more about the program and approached some school system to see if they were interested in studying it, and they really were. So we worked together to basically identify twice as many kids who might benefit from AVID as the schools had the capacity to serve, and then to use a lottery to basically decide out of that pool of kids who would be perfect for AVID, which ones would be offered a spot in the program. And that created two groups of kids who were in the AVID program and kids who were pretty much in every other respect the same as those kids, but they were not offered a spot in the program. And so as researchers, we followed both groups of kids from their very first transition into high school, either the end of 8th grade or beginning of 9th grade when they first joined that high school. And we've now followed them through the end of 11th grade. The study that was just published looked at the time from the beginning of high school to the end of 9th grade, because as you all know, we experienced the pandemic partway through. And so we wanted to sort of take the pandemic out of the mix and just look at, in a typical kind of school experience, what is the impact of AVID on health? So we looked at substance use, violence, delinquency, and relationships, the kinds of friendships students had, relationships with adults. And then we looked at their social emotional skills like grit, like school engagement, stress. So those were the main kind of things that we followed over time.
That's awesome. And so, one of the questions I was going to ask you is that one of the things that the AVID report says is that this is the first randomized controlled trial of AVID in the United States. And so I'm guessing that's kind of what you were just explaining about the two different groups. Is what makes that so special about doing it that way? I mean, what is it that, says, okay, we did our due diligence here?
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, this is the kind of research that we do in science when we're figuring out if a new medication works, for example. And the whole goal behind a randomized controlled trial is to make sure that any difference that you see between your two groups that you're comparing, you can really hone in on the fact that the differences were caused by the intervention, which in this case is AVID. And that is because, as I mentioned, when you randomize people to one group or the other, you really make sure that the only difference between those two groups of people is the intervention. So that really lets you make that argument that when you see differences between those groups, those differences are caused by the intervention itself. Otherwise, we worry about other things, sort of like muddying the picture. And we hear this all the time about programs in schools, like, well, maybe the kids had more supportive homes, or maybe the kids were just more motivated to begin with, or maybe the kids had a different friend group to begin with. In this case, because we randomize students to the AVID experience or kind of a typical school experience, none of those things are arguments to explain the differences that we saw.
Yeah, that's one of the things that was really cool, just as a note, is that we saw, the kids, something that was referred to earlier, which is that the kids they developed a more academic type friend group, as well as conversations where they were curious how each other was doing. And, you started hearing conversations where in the beginning at that school, you didn't hear talks at lunch. Now, don't get me wrong. We had some kids who were very focused on all of it, but not lots. But when more of the cafeteria is asking each other questions about how'd you do on this test, or what are you thinking about? What are you thinking about after high school? Because that was a huge deal. One of the things that was transitioning to that, where only a small population talked about what comes after high school, to a much larger group as they're having some success in classes and on their different tests and such as that they have to do to complete to get in. So, but it was just cool because, sorry, I got to be geeky about this because I'll never forget one day, because remember, I told you a little bit about the population in the beginning. And so you start being, celebrating successes when, you've been dealing with all kinds of different stuff that, that are problematic. And, one day you're standing in this area we call the breezeway, and, you get some kids walked by us and they were talking about how they were doing in class. Now, these were not kids that you would normally hear this from. These were a couple of guys that were constantly seeing, best way to describe them is, repeat customers to the assistant principals. And, and they're talking about testing, and they're talking about studying, and they were talking about, and specifically they're talking about some skill that they had learned in the AVID program, which I thought was cool. So once again, I did not get paid to say this stuff. This is cool to have to hear this, because we saw some of the same sorts of things with no formal study, but the fact that some of your same kids who were looking to see if there was some place other than the gang that they were associating with as they started hanging out with others, and very cool.
Yeah, and we know that peer influence is so powerful, especially during those teenage years. What your friends are into is a big, dictates a lot of your own behavior.
It really does. So this is so powerful. So, one of the things that the article talks about is that in the beginning, it says that tracking versus untracking in schools is something kind of typical. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk about what that is, and what the role that it played in doing the research that you're doing.
Yeah, great question. So tracking is really the practice of grouping kids in classes based on their prior school performance. And this happens a lot all the time in schools where, kids get programmed into the AP or the honors course because they performed really well the previous year and they seem like a strong student who could handle the work. And so it kind of makes sense why schools take this approach. And I think the goal is to be able to provide more targeted and differentiated education. There are lots of studies out there about sort of the academic merits of tracking. So I'm definitely not an expert in that area. But one of the things that struck me from a health standpoint was, part of the way kids make friends is by taking the same classes with each other. And so when you're sorting kids into these groups, according to classes, it really could impact their health as well. If we think about that spillover effect of how who you're exposed to kind of shapes who your friends are, and who your friends are shapes how you think about yourself and your future and your health choices. So part of what we really wanted to get into in this study was understanding whether this practice of grouping kids might actually influence their health. And what we found was that by sort of shifting the classes that the AVID kids were in and then being in more rigorous academic classes, it really did shape their friend group, and it did influence their health.
It's so it's so interesting. I grew up in a state where we were tracked, and they had basic, average, and advanced, and and as a note, as a kid, it's funny because I was in that average track, and for the longest time, and until an English teacher bumped me out of it into the next track for my senior year, and so I got to know a whole new group of kids, which is very interesting. And I've thought about it from time to time because the English teacher who was my junior English teacher, to say we butted heads is probably an understatement. Okay. And, but she saw something in me. And so as a result of her, I got to meet a teacher that I lovingly refer to as Yoda, after the Star Wars character, because she was brilliant and she was tough and she was very, talking about rigor, was extremely so, but she was amazing. And the class was interesting in itself, as we had, for the first time, I got to experience a study group type session where she encouraged us to bring food to these circles, and we talked about what we learned from the recent reading type of thing. And it totally changed. It's just amazing. So, and it's not like, I mean, I could talk with you about all kinds of other things out of the being in those different tracks, but it's just interesting how some of that can play off, and who you are with and what happens and all that sort of stuff. So, sorry.
Steve, what you both have been describing is exactly what I was referring to at the very beginning about AVID being a philosophy where educators are taking responsibility and holding one another and themselves accountable for doing what needs to be done to grow students in a way that all students can be successful. The D-tracking is what we refer to in our framework as breaking down barriers. You mentioned just now that Yoda, fondly referred to your English teacher, had exposed you to a different setup in a classroom with the group setup, the collaborative structures. We refer to them as in AVID. Those are all intentional acts that educators can take, right, that are inputs into the learning experience for kids that can have powerful impacts on the trajectory of their lives. You mentioned earlier also about the changing in the conversations you are hearing in the cafeteria. Those are examples or manifestations of what we refer to as opportunity knowledge. More and more kids were talking about what they plan to do after high school, whether it be going into the military, whether it be, going to college to get a business degree to help with the family business, or whatever their aspirations might be, because we've opened the landscape. We've extended, as I mentioned, the block in front of them and to the left and right of them. We've extended the landscape where now they're thinking differently. And so as a result, conversations are different. Right? Curiosities are different. And all of that is grown in the garden of the learning experience created by us educators. It isn't rocket science per se. It is challenging work. AVID is not plug and play, right? But it is so incredibly important that we educators provide these environments for kids, because it is the rest of their lives and generations behind them.
It's just so powerful, because you never know what impact you're going to have, what teacher, what conversation, what part of the environment is going to have on the choices that we make as kids. And it's just that one word or that one ability to do better, or just to be able to say, wow, I didn't do as bad as I normally do, or something, and it's, and then they shift gears, and it's funny because it's a neat thing. I mean, I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of, and you see that as a former high school principal. You saw it all the time. I'm a former high school history teacher. You'd see it in the classroom as well, and just good stuff. So I got to ask you, as we're coming close to the end here, one of the things I wanted to ask you all is to think about this. If you had a chance to do a keynote for a conference of school administrators, so and what this is the end of the day, so you're the closing part of the whole conference, and you want to make sure that you leave them with one thought when they go out that door. What's that going to be?
Rebbca, would you like to go? You want me to go?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start. So I really think the secret sauce here is that it all boils down to relationships. And certainly as a pediatrician, I see this all the time, that sometimes it seems like we're talking to adolescents and maybe they're dismissing or not hearing what we're saying. But over and over again, the evidence shows us that children are always looking at us. They're always watching us. They're always learning from us where their place is in the world and how the world will value and receive them. And relationships are incredibly powerful. I think this study sort of reinforces that if you can build that relational capacity in a school, you can not just impact a child's academic performance, but really, truly their health at a deep level and their trajectory.
Awesome.
I would, it would be a redundant keynote because I too would build an exiting message around the importance of establishing relationships and what we refer to as relational capacity on our campuses. I would also hopefully leave them with the message of the opportunity is within them. As educational leaders, they have the opportunity to establish a culture, to model behaviors, and to present and create results and outcomes that will excite, that will empower every one of the adults on their campus to do even a better job than what they're doing today. Really, what we have to understand as educators is we get what we get. Those kids that come to us, every one of them is a gift. They all bring something to the learning experience. Our job is to create a learning environment that exposes to each individual kids that gift and gives them a platform to share it with everyone around them. And that's what AVID is all about. AVID is all about educators being empowered to trust themselves, to trust their students, to grow into, and they get to guide and facilitate. They get that privilege we each do as educators, to guide and to facilitate their understanding of who they are and who they want to become. It sounds sort of idealistic and, but really, you've seen it, Steve. You've seen it on your campuses. Rebbca has seen it in her research, right? And she's presenting outcomes now that help me think differently about the potential. But what we do know is that when we create different types of experiences for kids that are based on relationships, that are built on what we call collective educator agency, when educators share beliefs that together and trust that together they can create learning environments to benefit kids, all kids, toward college and career readiness, that we have the ability to do that. That's the message I would leave them with.
Oh, I love this. This is awesome. It's powerful. And you make me want to go back to be with a school again. So this is...
Well, we could use you.
Well, thank you. This is so cool. Rebbca and Dennis, we're about to finish up. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and then after that, I got two last questions, which are just the questions I like to ask my guests. But before we close, if someone wanted to learn more, where would you send them?
I would send them to our website, of course, avid.org. Take a peek, take a look around. As I mentioned before, AVID is not plug and play, but AVID is incredible. And the impacts that we've had on educators, which I didn't talk a lot about at all about, at times like these when educators are leaving the profession, really strong, powerful educators are leaving our profession. What we've learned in states like Oregon is when educators come to our trainings and they learn what we're trying to do, and they leave us after only 3 days with the skills and the strength and the knowledge that they can do this, what we found was that educators, AVID trained educators, are significantly more likely to stay in the profession, to stay in their districts, and moreover, stay in their schools. And this is particularly true among first and second year educators. So in times like these, like today, where we're losing so many, right, empower your educators. They'll feel connected to school. They'll get those relationships built, and they're likely to stay and thrive in a profession that we desperately need them. avid.org.
And I will say, if folks want to learn more about the study, it is an open access publication, which we did purposefully because we don't want people to have to pay for a journal subscription to be able to access the research. We believe strongly that the communities that are impacted by this work should have access to that knowledge about the work. So it's available for free. I believe there's a link to it on the AVID website, and you should be able to find it at the Pediatrics Journal or the American Academy of Pediatrics.
It's right on our homepage.
Awesome. And I will have links to all that so that they can easily find it in my show notes. So with that being said, I got two more questions and before we close out. So the first one goes like this. So I'd like each of you to answer this if you could, which is, how do you keep going when so much is going on that you may want to quit?
Well, every morning I get up excited to do the work that I get the privilege of doing, because I've seen the impacts that teachers have. I've heard struggling and frustrated teachers in our trainings leave so excited about the opportunity that they're going to try new things in their classrooms. I've heard teachers on the verge of retirement saying, Dennis, I wish I would have known about this 20 years ago. Yeah, AVID isn't magic, but AVID works. I've told many people, I bleed AVID. I swear if I would have cut my arm, AVID would run down it. I'm a researcher. I'm a research scientist. I know AVID is not a silver bullet and AVID is not perfect, but AVID is powerful.
Yeah, I'll add to that I think I draw a lot of inspiration from the patients that I see in my clinic. And I absolutely I have the privilege of getting to spend a lot of my days with children and families. And it's really gratifying to be able to help children be healthier, make healthier choices in a world that often is an unhealthy world. And that's what inspires me in my research, to try to make the world a healthier place for kids, so children and families don't have to work so hard to make those healthy choices.
Excellent. I love them both. That's awesome. Good stuff. Last question. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given a chance to say thank you?
So I have two. I have a grade school. Actually, it was high school. Miss Haskins, and of all classes, it was my home economics course because I love to cook, and she sort of got me on that track. And the takeaway, what she taught me, was that education is power. And I don't mean in an authoritative way or disciplinarian type way when I mean power. What she meant then and what I mean now is it's power in a sense that it empowers me to make my own decisions. And it has empowered me to have the ability, the strength, the wherewithal, and the confidence to pursue opportunities when they presented themselves. And so I would thank her, and I'm thanking her now for that. And the second is Dr. Marty Sherman, who in my master's program, I got really hooked into statistics. I know most people are probably cringing right now, but statistics and research methods. And I told him one afternoon, I said, Marty, but how am I going to make a living? I've got I'm a brand new baby thinking about and coming on the way, and a young wife at the time, and I'm like, how am I going to make a living? He told me, he said, Dennis, he said, find your passion. When you do, it will excite you to the point where you'll become the best you can be at it, and the rest will follow. And I thank him, and I would thank him today as I am now for that. I pass that down to my kids and to everyone I try to have the opportunity to speak with.
Excellent. Thank you. That's cool. Rebbca?
Yeah, I will start by saying that I was really blessed to have had wonderful teachers throughout all of my education, and I am a proud product of public education in Los Angeles. And so just a shout out to all public school teachers out there. I really had a really rich education going through public school, both in terms of my academic and social education. So a plug for public schools there. I'm going to say thank you to a particular teacher, Paul Mertens, who was my junior high social studies teacher. And he really taught me the skills that I needed to be a student. And he gave me a real sense of self-efficacy, pushing me to sort of to be able to accomplish things that I didn't know I had in me. And I always say that it was actually his class that prepared me for medical school. So I think I took those life skills and study skills throughout the rest of my education.
Very cool. Thank you so much. Thank you both so much. This has been awesome. I mean, Dr. Rebbca Dudovitz and Dr. Dennis Johnston, I mean, it was awesome talking with you guys today. Thanks for sharing about the findings of the report. The AVID program leads to lower substance abuse, better health behaviors among high school students, UCLA research suggests. AVID is a powerful program already, but the research findings show that it possibly has a much larger impact on its participants than what we already thought about, so which is really cool. Hey, thank you so much. Wish you all the best.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio. Your voice is right. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.